If you're enjoying this podcast from us here at Which, then why not become a Which member? Right now, we've got a special offer, especially for podcast listeners, meaning you can choose any of our 3 membership tiers for 50% off the usual price. Starting at just £39.50 for a full year, you can get Which magazine delivered direct to your door. For the same price, you could also choose a digital Which subscription, giving you access to all of our product reviews, the Which app, and the digital edition of Which magazine. What's more, you'll also be able to use the Ask Which service for personalised one-to-one buying advice. Or why not get a full access Which subscription for just £49.50 for a full year? Don't forget, that's 50% off the usual price. To join Which or to find out more, just head to which.co.uk/podcast offer. That's which.co.uk/podcast offer, or click the link in the description for today's podcast for 50% off a Which annual subscription.
As we release this episode, it's 75 days until the autumn budget. But with so much rumour, should you try to preempt the budget now and start moving your cash? Welcome to Which Money. Hello, I'm Lucia Ariano, and with me today I have Sam Richardson, Which Money Deputy Editor, and Helen Morrissey, Head of Retirement Analysis at Hargreaves Lansdown. Hello both, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi Lucia.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you both. Shall we start from the top? Sam, compared to last year's budget, how much anticipation is there for this one?
I'd say it's just the same, actually. They're both hugely anticipated, perhaps the biggest budgets we've seen for many years. And I think, unfortunately, the problem with that is you get so much being written about it months beforehand based on very little, indeed, just kind of political rumours, and it can lead to really costly financial decisions. So I think both me and you, Helen, are probably going to spend this podcast kind of throwing cold water over various rumours.
So would you say then that it's kind of all rumour at this point, or is there anything that we actually do know?
From my point of view, clearly the government needs to raise quite a lot of money, and they have appeared to rule out some sort of taxes, although, that could always be reversed. So in the broadest terms, something will happen, and we'll go on to talk about the individual things. But I would say, there's very little set in stone at the moment.
In many ways, I feel like this budget is a continuation of the last budget because, as you say, there's been so many rumours and everything. And to an extent, the rumours never really stopped after the last budget. There were lots of rumours around, so say, for instance, tax-free cash and pensions that didn't come to pass in the last budget, but people just kind of carried on going, well, if it didn't happen in the last budget, it could happen in this budget. And so it's continued to bubble on. And as you say, we're still a good way out from, budget day, but these rumours are reaching, fever pitch already. And, as Sam said earlier, Rachel Reeves, she's got a challenging fiscal environment. She's got this so-called black hole that she needs to fill. She has made some promises around not increasing things like income tax, VAT, national insurance on workers. And so obviously that's leaving it with, less room to manoeuvre. So people are looking at some of these more personal finance related taxes as places where she might look to save a bit of money.
How are people responding? How is the nation responding? Or, are we not responding? Are we reacting quickly, or are we feeling a little overwhelmed and not really sure what to do?
I think that there's a lot of interest. So certainly, when people, I get a lot of questions from people as to what they think is really going to happen. So they are seeing, these rumours in the press and they are worried about it. Now, we have seen some articles in the press around, there was an FOI, for instance, around, people taking their tax-free cash that shows that that is elevated. So there is signs that people, maybe are looking to take action. But there's still such a long way to go. And, what could be a hot rumour one week could be in the dust the following one.
Just from the point of view of which, we have our money helpline, which takes calls from our members to help them with these issues. And they got quite a lot of calls after the last budget when it was announced that pensions would be included in inheritance tax, which hadn't previously been the case. And loads of people were suddenly like, oh God, what should I do? Should I try and, give away part of my pension in my lifetime? So these do have kind of real consequences for people. And after that being announced in the last budget, I imagine a lot of people, say with a large pension, will think, oh my God, are they going to continue to eat away at that in this budget?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right there, Sam. I mean, we had so many people coming to us saying, what does this mean for me? And I think, as you say, there's that concern there about people with larger pensions thinking, okay, do I start giving it away now? The challenges with that is that you could potentially give away too much too quickly and leave yourself struggling later on. There's also the chance that people operate under misconceptions, because I think IHT, people, it's complicated. People might not necessarily get it, so the fact that, you can transfer between spouses, any amount, and you won't pay any inheritance tax. I'm not sure how well those kinds of rules are understood. So what my concern is that we might have a lot of people worrying about IHT and pensions who maybe necessarily don't need to.
Well, I'm pleased you brought up inheritance tax. As you say, it was one of the biggest talking points after last year's budget, and particularly the announcement that private pensions will form part of your estate from 2027. I mean, that could prompt people to look at gifting before they die. But is there talk that a cap could be on the way? Sam, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, so the proposal is that the gifts that you can make tax-free could be capped across your lifetime. At the moment, the caps are more related per year. So, for example, you can give up to £3,000 per year without that being subject to inheritance tax. But actually, if you give the money early enough, say more than 7 years before you die, it won't be taxed at all. So gifting is this incredibly powerful tool to really pay very little inheritance tax if you use it right. So yeah, there's proposals around capping how much you could gift without it being subject to IHT, or changing that 7-year rule. This is 7 years before you die when gifts over a certain amount do begin to be subject to IHT. There's proposals about perhaps making that longer or changing how it works. I would say with this, gifting will remain an incredibly powerful tool for the simple fact that if you didn't make any gifts at all, you kept everything until you die, then those assets would be subject to IHT anyway. So there's this argument of why not give it away earlier, especially while your beneficiaries, say your kids or your grandkids, could really use the money.
Is that the advice then? I mean, not to start rushing to give your cash away, but what would your advice be, Helen, with this rumour going around?
But what I would say is that it is just that, it's a rumour. So, going back to, if we think of all of the rumours that we've had, in the run up to the last budget, for instance, and so many of them did not come to pass. And that is what often happens with budgets, spring statements, etc. What I always say to people is that we can only really operate in the system that we are in right now. We've seen people, try and act on what they think is going to happen, and then it hasn't happened. And then that's left them in a worse position. So, I would say work in the system that we are in now.
I suppose also with gifting, if you are considering making really quite big gifts that would affect your quality of life now, it is worth talking to a financial advisor rather than, say, trying to beat any change in tax here. And just be really, really careful with very complicated schemes. For example, this morning I got an email about forestry, which in theory can help reduce your inheritance tax bills if you buy loads of forestry. But there are loads of T's and C's. It's very complex, as are, situations around trusts, etc. So I'd really take independent financial advice before going down any of those routes. And of course, before you do any of this, check if you actually might have to pay inheritance tax at all on your estate, because it's less than 1 in 20 estates at the moment pay it. We've got a calculator on our website where you can work out if your estate is likely to be affected.
As you say, I do think inheritance tax is one of those areas where, as you say, you really should try and seek financial advice wherever possible. Because, as you say, there are some great allowances out there. There's the gifting out of surplus income rules that actually do allow you to give away, large amounts without them, attracting inheritance tax. But there are some rules around that, in that those gifts have to be made regularly. They've got to come out of your income rather than capital. So you can fall foul of them if you don't, keep really good notes as to what you've given to whom, for instance. So, as Sam says there, if you are thinking of going down these routes, it could be a really good idea to seek financial advice on that.
I mean, how great does your estate have to be for you to fall into the category that would pay inheritance tax?
So let's start with, as an individual, you can leave £325,000 worth of money and assets tax-free when you die. And if you are leaving your own home to a direct descendant, you get another £175,000, bring it to £500,000 per person. But because you can give everything to your spouse tax-free when you die, that means a couple can leave up to £1 million if they leave their home to a direct descendant. That is not including any of the gifting allowances we've been talking about. But you can already see that we're talking about quite a lot of money here before you start being taxed.
Absolutely. Very important to mention that point, I think. Well, shall we move on then to, because we've got a lot to discuss today, shall we move on to pensions? Now, Helen, there's a question mark on tax relief. What could change here, and what could the impact be?
Okay, so I have covered many a budget over my time in this industry, and one of the most persistent rumours that comes up time and time again is around restrictions to pensions tax relief. So the current rumours are, that they're going to go for some kind of flat rate. So that could be basic rate tax relief at 20%, or it could be a flat rate across the board of maybe 30%. Now, what that would mean is that people who are higher and additional rate taxpayers who currently get tax relief at 40 and 45% would see the amount of tax relief that they would get fall. So it's been a really, really persistent rumour that's come up in many a budget, but it has yet to happen.
So, I mean, what's the advice here? I mean, it's interesting because obviously if it's coming up again and again, should we be taking it very seriously? I'm not sure. Maybe that's my first question.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things that maybe on the face of it looks like it could be done quite easily. If you look at the data, you do see that the vast majority of tax relief does go to higher and additional rate taxpayers. So it could be seen as, being a good thing, potentially boosting basic rate taxpayers, pensions and things like that. But if you look at it in practice, the chances are that it's going to be a very complicated, long-winded change to actually bring through. I think it would be quite costly to do. And I think at the end of the day, you've got to wonder how much extra money it would bring in and how quickly it will bring it in. And I think that is kind of one of the key reasons why, maybe governments have stepped away from it, because it could just be too complicated.
Well, I suppose, as with all of the things that we're going to be talking about today, regardless of whether or not a change does come in, I mean, Sam, what's your advice here, generally speaking? Should we and how should we be utilising our pension allowance?
I mean, to my mind, there's very little disadvantage of putting more into your pension. Most of us aren't saving nearly enough into it. You can see the amounts that you'll need to retire in a certain standards of living at the Pension Lifetimes and Saving Association, I believe, the POSA, and they are terrifying. Many of us are nowhere near it. So, of course, if you are a higher rate or additional rate taxpayer right now, why not make the most out of this, potentially quite generous relief while you can, and, make additional contributions. Of course, you are limited to up to your salary or 60,000 a year, whichever is lower. But, do put away that extra money while you can. This is especially true, of course, it needs to be money you can spare. Shouldn't affect, your standard of living, and you should be paying off debts, all this sort of thing. But especially if you're coming up to near retirement, you really need to build up that pension as quick as you can. So I can't see the harm, if you've looked at your budget, putting a bit more in now, that will help you whether or not tax relief has changed.
If I could just jump into that, I mean, I agree with everything that you've just said there, Sam. So we run our own research, our HR Savings and Resilience Barometer, and what that has shown is only about 43% of people are on track for an adequate retirement income right now. So there's a massive, massive gap there. And what it's also shown is that higher earners are the ones most at risk of undersaving for retirement because they tend to stick at auto enrolment minimum levels. So it's not a case of we are in a society where people are well prepared for retirement. It is clear that we still have a long way to go, and we need to encourage people to save more for retirement.
Yeah, and just one more thing to mention on pensions that's really concerning a lot of people in the run up to the budget is the rumours that the amount of cash you could take from your pension tax-free could be cut. And this is really worrying because it's leading people to take money from their pension now without a plan of how to use that money, potentially just leaving it sitting there for years, being eroded by inflation as a savings account, which potentially itself is taxable. I mean, Helen, this is something that came up in the last budget as well, right? It's a real concern.
It's a huge issue, and it's probably the question that I'm asked about the most about these budget rumours. So as you say, I feel like the speculation on tax-free cash, it hasn't really simmered down since the last budget. And, as you say, there's all kinds of potential poor outcomes that can come about, So, a lot of people use a tax-free cash to maybe pay off their mortgage at retirement. And that's fine. It's what people do. If that's part of your plan, then great. But what these rumours, appear to be stoking is people just saying, I just need to take my tax-free cash now. And as Sam says, it's what are you doing it if you're taking it without any kind of plan? So you're taking it from a really tax efficient environment, potentially putting it in, as you say, savings that may or may not keep up with inflation. You could be putting them in other vehicles where they are attracting tax. If they're in an easy access, you could just fritter it away. And, there's just so many kind of potentially poor outcomes. And what we also had was that a lot of people thought that they could elect to take the tax-free cash and then reverse their decision, because they thought they had a 30-day cooling off period. But what then happened was HMRC, after the budget, said that can't happen. So there were loads of people that thought they could just put it straight back into their pension, that couldn't do it. There's also people that think, well, I'll just reinvest it back in. There's potential to breach recycling rules that could leave you clobbered with a tax bill as well. So it's really, really important that you look at all of the potentials, pros and cons of taking your tax-free cash, and try not to make a knee-jerk reaction based on speculation.
Again, potentially, is that a good time to take financial advice if you're unsure?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you are unsure about the best way forward, then, speak to an advisor.
Well, shall we move on then to income tax and national insurance? Now, not raising them for working people was a big manifesto pledge for the government. It's unlikely they will rise, if that's a fair comment to make, but could they extend the freeze on thresholds? Helen, do you want to start us off here?
Yeah, this is the real worry, isn't it? Because, as you say, the government said that they weren't going to increase income tax, but these frozen thresholds have been in place for a very, very long time. And if you look at the amount of tax that we are paying as a country, it is going up. And a lot of it is down to these threshold freezes that are either pulling people into tax-paying territory or getting people paying at a higher rate. It could be seen as a sneaky way of the government saying that they are keeping to that manifesto pledge to not raise income tax. But the reality is that if those thresholds, the freezes are continued, we are going to see our tax burden increase.
So what does the freezing of the thresholds actually mean for our finance then? Can we talk about some of the knock-on effects? And here I'm really thinking about our personal savings allowance. What would this mean for the tax on our savings?
Yeah, so personal savings allowance is very useful. It's the amount of savings interest you can earn per tax year without paying income tax on it. If you're a basic rate taxpayer, you can earn £1,000 in saving interest per year tax-free. It goes down to £500 per year if you're a higher rate taxpayer. And if you're an additional rate taxpayer, you don't get an allowance. So just to put this in context, I looked at savings interest rates this morning, and with the best savings rate, savings account on the market right now, as a basic rate taxpayer, you'd have to have over £21,000 in that account to actually be earning enough interest to pay tax on any of it. So this is quite a lot of money. But of course, the danger is, say you have £21,000 in your account, you're a basic rate taxpayer, and then you get a pay rise from your boss, and it could be as little as going from £50,000 to £52,000. Suddenly your personal savings allowance has halved. So actually about £10,000 of that savings, the interest on that you're earning, will now be taxed. So that's the risk for people, that something you were never being taxed on before, you suddenly are being taxed because you've got a pretty paltry pay rise in the grand scheme of things. The solution to this, to my mind, is quite simple. It's to move as much money into cash ISAs, where they're not subject to income tax at all. It also saves your personal savings allowance for, other accounts where perhaps you don't want to move it into an ISA. I'd really recommend people look into flexible cash ISAs here. These are ISAs where you can take money out and then you can return it without affecting your overall ISA allowance per year, which is £20,000. Whereas with other types of ISAs, if I withdraw £500 one month because, I'm a little bit short, and then return it the next month, it eats away at my allowance. So yeah, look into cash ISAs. They're frankly something we should be using every year, no matter whether there's a budget coming up or not. I'd really recommend them.
And a big talking point earlier in the year was reducing the cash ISA allowances. Could we see this implemented, do you think?
We wasted so much time earlier this year writing about cash ISAs and whether they'd be cut. There was a suggestion the annual ISA allowance could be cut from £20,000 to £4,000, perhaps with some sort of extra allowance if you put it into stocks and shares ISAs. From what I've heard, this basically ended with, we will do further consultation. Helen, I'm not sure if you've heard any more.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, we're still kind of waiting to hear how that one's going to shake out. But as you say, these are people who are trying to save for their future. They're trying to do the right thing. And, it goes, it's very similar thing with pensions as well. People are trying to do the right thing and give themselves a resilient retirement income. And, what we really call for is that we need a stable environment for people to do that without these threats of cuts. And I think the whole thing with the rumours around the cash ISA allowance is that it thought, there was this view that it would funnel more people into investing. And that isn't necessarily the case. Just because you're stopping people saving in cash doesn't make them investors. And actually what we need to be doing is looking at why aren't people feeling comfortable investing, and, addressing that, do they have enough support? What more can be done to try and get people to take that extra leap? And if they feel that investment is right for them, that they feel comfortable going to do it.
And moving on now to stamp duty. It's been in the headlines a lot recently, but are there reports that there could be changes made again?
Yeah, so just to recap on stamp duty, the threshold at which you start paying it, it's related to property price, was doubled in Liz Truss's mini budget, and then it was reduced again to its original level this April, meaning people are paying more of it. And of course, because with stamp duty, you have to pay it, I think it's within 14 days of completing on your house purchase, and you have to pay it in cash. It's extra money you need to save in addition to the property price. So it is really painful for people to pay. And in theory, it reduces the amount of people moving, because you're like, well, in addition to, saving all this money, I'm just going to lose this lump sum straight away. So there are proposals to scrap stamp duty, perhaps replacing it with an annual tax on properties worth more than £500,000. I mean, the figure I saw reported was 0.54% per year on the value of your house worth more than £500,000. Just to start off with this, I mean, stamp duty makes a huge amount of money for the government. 11.6 billion was the most recent figure. That's per year, by the way. So any scrapping of stamp duty would have to be accompanied by some sort of other tax or other tax rise that would make up for that. So that makes me wonder, will it happen? However, it is something for people to consider. If you are considering moving, this is really, really something to think about. I mean, to my mind, Helen, if I was considering moving now, I would perhaps be pausing my plans for 2 months. But what do you think of that?
Yeah, because as you say, there's been so many rumours, hasn't there? And as you say, if stamp duty were to be abolished, as you say, that would probably be some pretty good news to, first time buyers. As you say, it's a big chunk of change that they've got to find, an already really expensive process. Not having to pay that could really help free up the housing market. But then, as you say, we're hearing these rumours about, these taxes on these bigger properties. And, that could also kind of gum up the housing market as well, because, you're thinking about people who are maybe looking to downsize in retirement and have these more expensive homes. And if you're making it more expensive for them to sell, then they may not sell. So there could be lots of issues there. There was also the rumour around was it national insurance on landlords on the rental income? We're already seeing kind of very challenging times for buy-to-let landlords. We are seeing more of them looking to exit the market. That could free up more houses for sale, but then also it's a case of those that remain, rents could potentially go up, and that gives more issues for renters' personal finances, which are already extremely stretched.
Does feel like quite a drastic potential change, but I do remember us having a similar conversation during COVID, where we were talking about a possible stamp duty holiday at the time, and we thought, actually, no, it can't happen. But I suppose we'll have to watch this space and see what happens. We've covered so much ground today, but I'd just like to know if there are any final thoughts from you that you'd like to share. Anything we haven't mentioned. Helen, would you like to go first with any final thoughts?
I mean, for me, from someone who has covered many a budget, I am praying for a quiet budget. I don't often get them at all. But, I would like to see a very quiet budget from a pensions perspective, because people need, if we want people to save for a financially resilient future, we need to give them the stability in order to do it.
I actually am really sick of budgets, despite being a financial journalist. I think they're really damaging to people because we put so many of our plans on hold. We get distracted by speculation, make all sorts of odd decisions for something we really don't know anything concrete about, to the day it's announced. I guess my advice for people would be continue doing the good things that you're already doing, continue putting money in savings, ideally into cash ISAs, continue contributing into your pension. Perhaps the only one where I'd pause my plans is perhaps with property purchase, because it's so big, and waiting a few months, probably won't change the situation that much. But otherwise, don't let this get in the way of your kind of financial plans, because if you do, you're probably going to be sitting there on the 26th of November being like, actually, that change wasn't as big or as helpful to me as I thought it would be.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. We'll have to catch up on budget day and give you the lowdown. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from Which, the UK's consumer champion. You can find plenty more advice about what we discussed today in the show notes. There you'll also find a link to become a Which member for 50% off the usual price, an offer exclusively available to you, our podcast listeners. Joining Which will not only give you access to our product reviews, our app, one-to-one personalised buying advice, and every issue of Which magazine across the year, but you'll also be helping us to make life simpler, fairer and safer for everyone. Don't forget to hit subscribe wherever you're listening. That way you'll be notified whenever we release a new episode of Which Money, Which Shorts, or any other podcast that we make for you. And if you want to get in touch with us, then follow us on social media at Which UK, or drop us an email to podcast@which.co.uk. See you next time.
Do you want to reduce your energy bills? Or maybe you want to use greener energy? Go solar and get a discount. Right now, Which members can get a 7.5% discount on solar panels and their installation if you use Heatable, a Which Trusted Trader approved service. You can also include a storage battery and EV charger. handy if you're looking at making the switch to an electric car. To make use of this exclusive offer, simply head to which.co.uk/solar-offer. That's which.co.uk/solar-offer before the 30th of September 2025. And if you're not already a Which member, you can grab a year's membership for 50% off the usual price. To do that, go to which.co.uk/podcast offer to get involved. Start your solar journey today. Go solar and get a discount with Which.